Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 2. All right, so this week we're going to be discussing the history of policing. There's a lot of information in the chapter, so I'm not going to be able to cover all of it in this video. So please be sure to read the chapter, and then use the PowerPoint that I've included in the module. All right, so why study the history of policing? Well, it's important because in order to inform the future, you have to learn from the past. There's a saying, those that don't understand history are doomed to repeat it. Well, that very much applies, to the history of policing. Because the history of policing is full of some good things and some not so good things. Okay, so in order to move policing forward, we have to understand where policing's been before we can do that. So as you're going through the material, one of the enduring issues that I hope becomes apparent to you when reading the chapter is trying to decide what the role of the police should be in society has been a continuous and constant issue, right? Since the very beginning of policing, people have debated and argued what should the police be doing, what should their role be in society, and that has evolved over time. And as I'm sure you all know, that discussion is still occurring right now. It has really been at the forefront by the last 10 years or so. So one of the main reasons why it's so difficult to determine what and how the police should police is because every policing context is different. States are different, cities are different, neighborhoods are different, and individual situations are all different. Okay, and all those things impact policing. Okay, so keep that in mind as you're kind of reading through all this. Think about how the police role has evolved, as policing has changed over the years. All right, let's get into the material for this week. I'm going to start with policing in 19th century England. Okay, the other stuff is important to know, but because of time constraints and really 19th century England is really where the more important influences on American policing begin. Okay, so the first kind of important character in this historical story is Sir Robert Peel. Okay, prior textbooks, like when I took policing and things like that, often referred to him as the father of modern policing. Now they've moved away from that a little bit because, as your textbook says, other people were also involved. It wasn't just Robert Peel in England, but he's a very important character in the development of what we know as the police today. I mean, police in England are called bobbies because of Sir Robert Peel. So he created the first modern-day police force in London in 1829 when the passage of the Metropolitan Police Act was done. And through his approach to policing, there was developed a series of principles, again, probably with the help of others, that outlined his new approach to policing. I'm not going to go into all of them, but he believed that analyzing crime and distributing police accordingly was important. Okay, and he believed in having standards for hiring police, and that they should not be violent people, that they should be of an even temperament. He believed in training and making police accessible to the public, and that police should be hired on a probationary basis so that they could be removed if you needed to. So, actually, I just went through quite a few of those. But so, if you look at those 12 principles, it's really easy to find the roots of modern policing in them. So, when policing came to America, now it wasn't an exact replica from England to America, but there's certainly influences that occurred then and also continue to influence American policing now. So, moving into America, when the colonies were established, they all had some type of police, kind of as discussed in the chapter, like night watches, things like that. But for a variety of reasons, that wasn't an effective way to maintain order in society. So then as cities grew, more crime started occurring because as you have more people, you have more crime. That's a very well-established kind of fact. So something else was needed, right? Just having a night watch and having people police themselves, like that wasn't enough for what was happening in America. So that's what led to the creation of police departments in America. So first they started out with a daytime force with still maintain that night watch component. So that's kind of the start of what we see as this modern 24-hour, 7-day-a-week police force that we know today. So there's four main theories that are used to kind of explain the development of police in America. But remember, none of these theories really fully explains how police developed, but each of them can be applied in certain contexts. And that's the thing about theories. Theories often don't fully explain anything, okay? But they may explain portions of something. And then if you combine theories, then you can kind of get this much larger kind of theory that explains something. So the first is disorder control theory, and that explains the development of police departments through their need to suppress mob violence. Okay, over the years, going back into the a couple hundred years ago, cities experienced riots and other large disorders, and they had to have somebody to come and suppress those incidents. So the police were one of those avenues for doing that. Okay, the second is crime control theory. So as criminal activity increased, there was a perceived or real need for a new type of police to address these crime problems rather than just a night watch and things like that. Third is class control theory. So class control theory views the development of police as a result of class-based economic exploitation. It's basically the haves suppressing the have-nots. So urban and industrial growth coincided with the development of the police. So as urban and industrial growth happened, people of different social and ethnic backgrounds began to compete to try to improve their economic standing, and this caused disruption to the status quo. So then the police were then used to suppress those causing the disruption and try to maintain status quo. Then the final is urban dispersion theory. So this theory suggests that some cities created police departments just because other cities had police departments. Police were viewed really as this kind of important part of the government structure and were viewed as providing a stabilizing influence in communities. Kind of a related theory to this is institutional theory, which we're not going to cover right now. But institutional theory says that police departments look the same because there's a kind of view of what a police department should be, so then other places also make their police department look that way. So it's kind of related to this urban dispersion theory, where cities looked at other cities like, well, man, we probably ought to have a police department too, so they created a police department. So kind of your early police departments were Boston in 1837, New York in 1844, Philadelphia in 1854, and these were all at least loosely based on the 12 Pelian principles. But there's differences because there's differences in social context, there's differences in political environment, law enforcement policies. All those things differed in America versus England, and also differed between cities. Okay, just like we just talked about a minute ago, there's all these contextual issues that influence policing. Well, social context, political environment, law enforcement policies, and priorities all influence the development of early police departments. Kind of at the same time, we had county sheriff departments dominating rural America, while you had those urban areas creating the police departments. Okay, so sheriffs are really kind of an interesting part of policing because they are an elected position. Unlike police chiefs, colonels of the highway patrol, things like that, sheriffs are the only ones pretty much that are elected. And sheriffs have this really large number of responsibilities, including usually running the county jail. Now, some municipal police departments do have jails, but sheriff's departments almost always have a jail. And if there's only one jail in the county, it's the sheriff that has that. They also have varying responsibilities, again, based on context. Sometimes they collect some types of taxes. They almost always serve civil processes. They provide personnel and security for the courts, like bailiffs. Like those are usually sheriff department employees. They operate the jails and other facilities, maintain peace and order, provide general law enforcement services in unincorporated areas. So you have like take Greene County, for example. So you have Springfield PD, and then you have Greene County Sheriff Department. So Springfield PD is responsible for the city of Springfield, and then Greene County is responsible for the unincorporated areas outside of that. And then they also sometimes provide contract law enforcement services. If you have a municipality that doesn't have their own police department, they may contract with the sheriff's office to provide law enforcement services in that particular municipality. All right, so because you have these different police departments and sheriff's offices and these different things, one of the really kind of unique aspects of American policing is how localized it is. There's thousands of local police departments and sheriff's departments. So that's called fragmentation. Okay, so fragmentation means you have policing at different levels and they look different and things like that. So that's directly related to how policing developed in the social context and political environments, where they emerged and evolved. So because of the way police departments have evolved, there's kind of two main distinct areas of policing, eras of policing. The first is the political era. From about the mid-1800s to about the 1920s, policing was very dominated by politics. Okay, politicians and politics decided almost everything related to policing. Who was hired, who was promoted, who was arrested, who was appointed to police commission, or who was appointed police chief. What types of services were rendered, who they were rendered to. All those things were determined by politics. Now, there's still politics involved in policing. Don't think that there's not. But in this era, politics was everything, and politicians controlled everything. So as you could probably guess, because there was this really large influence of politics, corruption was rampant. Okay, so you had some groups that received services they needed, yet others that didn't. So, for example, influential people would receive services that other people would not because they were politically powerful. Okay, political patronage was also very commonplace, and that was rewarding people with jobs because of political support. Okay, so if people supported a particular politician and they won the election, then they would provide police jobs to people that supported them. So you ended up with a police force that, yes, there were some people that really did try to do a good job. There were people that tried to be fair and that, but you also had a lot of people that were just police officers because, they got appointed to that job and they figured they were safe because a politician controlled the police department. So they would be hanging out in bars, they would be doing all these things that police shouldn't be doing, and sometimes just not doing anything. Okay, so this really was kind of a difficult era for the police because they were also used to police elections. Okay, and by doing that, they could control who voted, how they voted, they could put pressure on people. And if you watch movies, and I'm going to kind of date myself here, but Gangs of New York, it really does show kind of this political influence of the police and how the police are used to do things. So using them to police elections really was the easiest way for politicians to maintain control. If you're a politician in charge and you have the police influencing the elections, then you get to stay in charge, and the police people still get to keep all their jobs, right? So it was just kind of this never-ending kind of cycle. Okay, so, but the interesting thing is during the same time, it was also coinciding with the progressive era. Okay, so the progressive era levied a lot of criticism about this era of policing, but not just police, all city services, because politicians were very, very powerful and they controlled lots of things. Okay, and cities kept getting larger, the problems kept getting bigger, so change was needed. Okay, so the progressive era of municipal reform was based on three basic ideas: honesty and efficiency in government, more authority of public officials and less for politicians, and the use of experts to respond to problems. Okay, so as you can guess, if you have politicians that are very, very powerful, these kind of ideas were slow to gain in popularity. Okay, and actually, they started more kind of outside and then kind of worked their way into the cities, but it slowly began to shift the police away from the political era into the reform era. Okay, so then the reform era started about 1920, or in the 1920s. And really that was from like the 20s to about the 60s. Okay, so there was this real push to professionalize the police. Okay, which was their way of saying we need to improve police behavior and performance. Need to adopt a code of ethics. Need to improve selection, training, and management. It made crime control the core strategy. Okay, so it was basically the antithesis of the political era. Okay, so this is known as the reform model of policing. Okay, you'll also see it known as the professional model, the bureaucratic model, legalistic model, quasi-military model. All those things kind of mean the same thing. This reform model that happened starting in about the 20s. Okay, so also part of this model was that community relationships should be based on law and departmental policy instead of political considerations. Okay, so police departments should not be unduly influenced by politics or by personal considerations when they make decisions, right? There should be law, there should be department policy that's being used. So these ideas were quick to take hold in the suburbs. However, not so much in the urban areas, because the urban areas were still plagued with many of the problems associated with the police, because obviously the politicians are not just going to want to give up, this power. But the principles of, being well trained, being courteous, having good equipment, employing the latest management principles, like those things make sense to people, and they slowly start working their way into the urban areas. Okay, another important part of this reform era was the use of commissions to investigate problems with the police and also the criminal justice system in general. So the thing about commissions is that normally these are temporary assignments. They're formed to investigate a particular issue or issues, and then they disband once the work is completed. However, the Chicago Crime Commission became a permanent commission. But one of the real kind of well-known commissions during this time was the Wickersham Commission, headed by August Vollmer. Now, August Vollmer is another really important name to remember in policing. But he authored the report from this commission. And in this report, he identified the major problems in law enforcement at the time: political influence, inadequate leadership and management, ineffective recruitment, ineffective training, lack of use of technological advances. So Vollmer was really, really important regarding the professionalization movement. And he's kind of considered the father of police administration. But he had a protege, O.W. Wilson, who actually wrote the first book on police administration. And some of the formulas and things that he used in that book, now this is a long time ago he wrote this book. Some of these formulas and some of the stuff that he talks about in this book is still used in policing today. He had formulas for staffing police departments, distributing police departments, and police departments still use these formulas that O.W. Wilson created during this professionalization time of the police. So one of the things that helped, so we're talking about the 20s to the 60s. Well, the Great Depression was a big deal during that time. And the Great Depression actually helped police professionalization movement. So as you know, in the Great Depression, there was not a lot of money. There was a lot of unemployment. So this lack of funding allowed for the easier centralization of police departments and helped to remove political influence. So they were able to, centralize police departments instead of having all these, kind of different, precincts and all these things that were all kind of influenced by different politicians. They centralized everything. Well, that helped remove political influence. And also then you have this unemployment. So you had more well-educated, middle-class Americans becoming interested in policing because of the job security. So from the 30s to the 60s, these tenets of reform that we talked about had really started taking hold and were becoming commonplace. But then you get to the 60s, and the 60s were a real turbulent time for a lot of different reasons, not just in policing. But some of these new reform ideas then began to be questioned during the urban riots, the civil rights movement, and there was this perception of an increasing crime rate. So again, you have a lot of concerns revolving around the police. So again, we had some commissions that were established to examine the role of police. So you had the President's Commission on Law Enforcement and Administration, and the National Advisory Commission on Civil Disorders. So then each of these commissions then provided recommendations. So these recommendations were kind of a blend of previous reform suggestions, because some of the things that the reform era did in the professionalization movement were good, but new ones intended to make the police more responsive to citizens. Okay, so part of the professionalization process was kind of pulling the police back from having these relationships with citizens and basing everything on policy, everything on law. Well, they realized that that really wasn't necessarily the best way to be. The police need to be involved in neighborhoods. They need to, get to know people. So some of the suggestions coming out of these commissions said the police need to be more responsive to citizens. So these recommendations did not result like in the abandonment of this legalistic system, but rather, there was more debate, and then some of these tenets were modified, or kind of replaced gradually over time. But Vollmer and Wilson are both really, really important characters. So be sure to read the sections on both of them. They're both really kind of interesting characters. Okay, so to this point, most of this discussion really has been on municipal police departments. But policing was developing at the state and federal level as well. Not all the way back in the 1800s for the most part, but so you had municipal, you have county, so also at the state and federal level, you also had stuff happening. So state level policing was slower to take off than municipal policing, with most major police agencies coming into existence in the 1900s. So most of your state police agencies weren't around until after 1900. Okay, and then by 1960, most states did have a state police agency. One of the main reasons for this was because of the expansive highway system. They needed somebody to be able to do things at a state level. So I'm going to briefly kind of talk about the state level, but I'm not going to discuss the federal level stuff at all. So you'll be responsible for that. It's really just discussing a few of the different federal agencies. So be sure to look at it, use the PowerPoints. So the first state to have a state-level police agency was Texas, with the Texas Rangers. So they started out in the early 1800s as kind of a group to protect rural residents of Texas. But then, as Texas gained independence, and things evolved, the Texas Rangers evolved, and then other state law enforcement agencies developed. But where and what they did really varied by context. Okay, they filled various types of roles and had different duties, and then they all kind of evolved and began to do more of this routine police work, like what we think about in our municipal police departments. So there were two main models for state policing, and there still is today: state police and highway patrols. Okay, state police normally have like broad law enforcement powers, like what you would expect from any police agencies. Well, at least initially, highway patrols were limited to traffic enforcement. Okay, so states started having highway patrols because the highway system started becoming more expansive. You started having these interstates, and they had to have somebody to be out there to enforce the law on these highways. So they started having highway patrols to do that. So highway patrols had then evolved over time from agencies that really only handled traffic enforcement and accidents and things like that, to where by the 60s, like 2/3 of them had general police duties. Okay, and most of them do today. And then additionally, at the state level, you've got state agencies that do things like liquor patrol, parks and conservation enforcement, gambling enforcement. Okay, so at the state level, it started out with this, like the state police and highway patrol, and now they've kind of evolved even further. And even sometimes like under the state police, you'll have divisions like for liquor patrol or parks or gambling and those types of things. Sometimes they're different agencies altogether. Okay. All right. I'm going to stop here. I've talked long enough. And I know there's several sections that I skipped. Please be sure to read the chapter. Use the PowerPoint that I provided. Please remember to complete your assignments for this week. And as always, let me know if you have questions. I'll see you next week.